This is the Daily Wealth Junkies Show, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Brandon Dukeman here with Will Harvey, and we've got an awesome show in store for you today. But first, be sure to follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/wealth junkies, and also subscribe to the show so that you're not missing any of our daily episodes, and rate and leave us a comment so that we know how we're doing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Will, and he's going to introduce our awesome guest for the day.
Thank you, Brandon. Today we have Josh Patrick on the show. He is a serial entrepreneur. He started several businesses and has made every mistake imaginable. And now he helps private business owners understand the secrets of cracking the cash flow code. And I'm really excited to hear about what that is. So with that, Josh, can you give the listeners just a little bit more about your background and what got you to where you are today?
Sure. Thanks a lot for having me on today, guys. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it. So my background is I grew up in a family business, and like everyone who grows up in a family business, I also worked in the family business while I was growing up. And when I went to college, I did the 6-year plan instead of the 4-year plan, but that happens in many of us, especially.
Yeah, I think I was on the 6 or 7 year, 8-year plan, whatever. But
I was having too much fun. They actually didn't want me to come back, so I had to take a couple of years off, watch the Grateful Dead played about 9 zillion times, and travel around the Northeast watching them. And then I went back to school, got a degree. Thought I was going to be a lawyer when I went back to school, but then I actually started looking at what lawyers do. And I said, I don't want to represent guilty people, so I think I'll look at something else to do. So the family business was the path of least resistance. I joined it. Unfortunately, my father and I had a torturous relationship at best. And luckily, we had an operation that was 2 hours away from where he was, and he sent me up there to close it down. Instead of closing it down, I got 5 new accounts in 2 days. So he said to me, I don't want to go up there anymore. You buy it from me, which was probably the best thing in the world, because had I not done that, I wouldn't have made it for another 2 months with him before I went off and did something else.
Mm-hmm. And what was the family business?
It was a food service and vending company.
Okay.
And we essentially fed people working in factories.
Awesome.
And I took that business and grew it from myself and a part-time person to 90 employees with 4 branches when I sold it 20 years later. So after that, I was looking around, so okay, what I wanted to do. I always liked consultative selling a lot. So to make a long story short, I went into the life insurance business for 2 years and realized that working for any company was not a good idea for me. And on top of that, what they call warm market in that world was privately held business owners. And lo and behold, privately held business owners would like to talk about something besides life insurance when it comes to financial stuff. So I ended up owning my own wealth management firm, attracted a few people there, put together multiple programs over the years aimed at helping private business owners create excess cash in their business and life. We have a program called Cracking the Cash Flow Code. I have another one called the Financial Freedom Project, where we help private business owners become financially free from their business. So that's a very long story, which I made into a very short little soundbite for you.
Yeah, and I'd love to dive into it a little bit and extract some things from that. When your dad sent you up to that place that you ended up growing and ultimately purchasing from him, what did you do from there? Was it always your vision to end up selling, or did you just go?
I don't think if you're going into a business with the vision to selling, you shouldn't start your business, in my opinion. You see a lot of advisors say when you go into business, you need to be thinking about your exit strategy. Well, I think that's, if you want to be a Silicon Valley unicorn and you're going to take venture capital money, yeah, you better be able to talk about your exit strategy, because they're not going to fund you unless you do. But that's like, 1/1000th of the businesses that exist in the United States. There's maybe a couple of hundred out there that do that sort of thing, but there's 28 million businesses, and the vast, vast, vast majority of business owners I've ever seen don't even think about an exit when they go into it. They go into it because they think they have a better mousetrap.
Mm-hmm.
And they're excited about the better mousetrap. And if you're excited about the better mousetrap, why would you be excited about your exit strategy?
Right.
To me, that makes no sense.
Yeah, no, that's good. So you were just growing. You were focused on
I was
growth.
focused on one thing, growing the top line, and that was my problem. I forgot to say, if you grow the top line, you better grow the bottom line as well. And that's a mistake I see too many business owners make, is they don't price their products properly. And when they get into business, they aren't looking at making sure they keep enough cash on hand to get them through the tough times, and they end up running out of cash. They have no place to turn to get more cash, and as a result, their business goes away.
Mm,
You
okay.
you probably have read the statistics that only 5% of newly formed businesses last for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the vast majority of those businesses that don't make it because they run out of cash. Without cash, you can't play the game anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you need to be thinking more about, how am I going to get out of business? How am I going to curate enough cash to keep this thing going? That's a much bigger problem for people who are starting up new.
So what if you, it sounds like you made that mistake yourself, is that right?
I did.
So
In a
if
major
you were to,
in a major way.
yeah, so if you were to go back in time and could do it over again, what would you do differently? How would you set up the reserves or
First thing I would have done is learn how to read a cash flow statement. You
okay,
know, and I say this all the time. If you go to France, what do you do when you get there?
go to the Eiffel
Oh,
Tower?
Well,
I don't know.
you might speak French because that's the language that people in France speak.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or at least
And
want
if
to
you're
learn how to speak French.
Well, that would be something that would be probably useful, but we in the US don't speak many languages, but
That's
that's a
correct.
different conversation. At any rate, if you're going to be in France, or you're going to be in Italy, you're going to be in Spain, you're probably going to want to try to speak the local language. Well, what's the language of business? It's finance.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have to understand how to put a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet together and a cash flow statement, but you sure as heck better be able to read those things. Because if you can't read them, I'll tell you what happened was, we were making what looked to me like a lot of money. We had a 5% bottom line, which for the food service business was a really good bottom line. I was showing profits of $150,000 or $200,000 a year, except for one thing. We were spending $1 million a year on new vending machines for 3 years in a row. And the money you spend on vending machines didn't show up in the profit and loss statement, but they did show up in the cash flow statement.
Hmm.
But since I didn't know what a cash flow statement was, or even how to read a cash flow statement, I ended up running out of cash and having no place to turn. And that was
Oh,
not a very happy couple of months of time for me.
No, I can imagine.
And then, I had a bunch of other stuff go along, which I won't bother you with right now because it's a long story. But our bank also went under examination and they tossed us out. And I had to try to
oh
find a
wow.
new bank with what's called a 14-to-1 debt to equity ratio, which means I had $14 in debt for every dollar I had in equity in the business. And by the way, that's not a
Banks
good
don't like
place to
that, do
be.
they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Banks don't like to do that very much
No.
unless you understand how banks think, which I did. That's one of the things I learned.
So, and uh, you were fairly young when this was going on, right? I mean, early 20s. Is
Yeah,
that
this was before I was 30.
wow?
Wow.
And I mean, the
Um,
amount of lessons that you learned from that.
well, I was the absolute worst manager that ever lived for the first 5 years I was in business.
Mm-hmm.
Literally nobody was ever worse than me. I never took responsibility for anything that went out wrong in the business. I always blamed others and I justified my behavior all day long. And I would scream, not, yell at somebody, but scream at somebody every single day, calling them all sorts of names under the sun. And I can promise you that that is not a way to build loyalty with your employees.
No, no, it might get some things done, but it probably
Well, it got some things done, but not the way I wanted them to, because people would sit there and, when you embarrass somebody, they will get you back.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's so true. So where did you go from there after you were in a pretty dark spot and just not a lot of hope on, looking forward? What did you do?
Well, started reading a whole bunch of business books. I mean, I had been reading a book a week for years because I was a history major in college. And so I was kind of used to reading 40, 50, 60 books a year. So I changed that reading from about history and political science to reading about business. And I took as many courses as I could possibly find. They were not really, college courses, but these 3-day seminars I would go to.
Hmm.
And then I did some online stuff before there was online. There used to be these, little boxes that came, which were, how to do finance or how to hire people. And I'm just kind of a curious person. So I kept trying to learn new things along the way. And one of the things I learned I needed to do was take a good look at myself in the mirror and stop blaming other people and justifying my way through life and taking responsibility when things didn't work wrong because it was my fault.
Was there a day that you realized that, or an incident, or
I actually,
somebody that brought your attention to that?
yeah, I actually went to this New Age seminar called Money and You. And it was a 3-day seminar. It's kind of like a seminar called EST,
Hmm.
which Werner Erhard put together again in the early 70s, late 60s. And this was a break off of that. And during those 3 days, I learned that, it wasn't other people that were the problem. It was me that was the problem. So I better fix myself first.
Right.
And by understanding that, that started me towards a metamorphosis of learning how to delegate, how to trust, how to ask good questions. I went through and did a bunch of neuro-linguistic training, became a master neuro-linguistic person.
That's the
That's what Tony,
NLP thing.
yeah, NLP, that's what Tony
Okay.
Robbins teaches. I actually knew Tony before he became Anthony, and then he became Tony again. I
Oh,
was
very
at the
cool.
seminar Tony was discovered, was actually a break off of the Money and You program.
Wow.
No
So,
kidding.
from say 1980 to 1985, 86, I was doing all this sort of new age stuff working on me, and then allowed me to turn around and work on my business at the same time. Because by learning how to let other people make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, it also allowed me to learn how to delegate.
Mm.
And probably the most important skill you're ever going to learn if you want to run a business successfully is how to delegate, and it's something almost nobody ever learns or learns how to do well because nobody does it right out of the box.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit and just
Yeah,
explain how
yeah,
to
sure. So
Yeah.
the way people typically learn to delegate is they say, "Hey, Joe, go over here and do that." And then because I've told Joe to do that, I think I've actually delegated to Joe. And then months later, I'm going to come back and Joe hasn't done the work right. I'm going to explode and I'm going to say, well, delegation obviously doesn't work,
Right.
so I can't do that anymore. Instead, what you really need to do if you delegate, you need to adopt what I call EIA. And this was taught to me by my first mentor in business, a guy named Shields Harvey. Shields said, well, when when you tell someone to do, first you got to set an expectation. That's the E. And then you got to go in and inspect it. And that's what you guys never do. So most people, when they first start delegating, they'll set an expectation, but they never go and inspect, which means they never have the opportunity to accept or reset the expectation. And when you're first delegating, I can promise you that you're going to have to reset your expectations almost every single time you do it until you learn how to set expectations properly and have systems in place to support your expectations. Does that make sense?
No, it
Yeah.
makes perfect
Ab-
sense. I
s-
remember listening. Oh, sorry. What were you
Good.
saying, Brian? I was going to say somebody that either we interviewed or I heard somewhere else said if you can find somebody to do and delegate it to them and they do it 80% of how you would do it, that's all you need, and because people aren't going to operate 100% how you would. You're the
Nor do you
business
want
owner.
them to. Nor do you
Right.
want them to. I mean, and
Right.
the other thing you want to do is, another mistake people new in business make all the time is when they hire people to come and work for them, they hire clones from themselves. You need to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And what you're good at, I'm a big fan of becoming world class. So what you're good at, you want to really work hard on so you become world class. What you're not good at, you want to hire other people so you can manage them to do that for you.
Mm.
And you're going to be a lot more effective, have a lot more fun, and avoid burnout. Now,
Yeah.
people will
That's
walk in my
great.
office on a fairly regular basis, and I'll say, "Okay, what are we talking about?" I said, "I want to sell my business." And I'll say, "When?" They'll say, "Yesterday." That's almost a pure sense that
Yeah.
they've been working tactically in the business, doing things they're not very good at, and they're really tired.
And
If
that
you
aren't fun for them.
Right, and if you're
Right.
doing things you're really good at, it's fun. You have unlimited energy for it, and you're not going to get burned out.
Right. So
That's
once you learn to delegate the tasks and things like that, did you see, I mean, an exponential increase in your productivity and in your business and things like
Oh
that?
gosh, yes. I mean, our business we went from being a good business to being probably one of the 5 best food service companies in the country.
Wow.
We did stuff that
no kidding.
nobody else would even think about.
Mm-hmm.
And we were so good at it, people kept scratching their head and thought, and my competitors used to think I was crazy because I would make all these sort of guarantees that, we wouldn't run out of certain products. And if we did, we'd get everybody free coffee. I said, how can you do that? You're going to be giving free coffee every day. I said, well, maybe you would.
Right. Yeah. But I do things a little differently. So,
We had figured out some different stuff along the way, and it was by asking questions. We were the first vending company in the country, and probably the only vending company in the country that I'm aware of to have a total quality control program in it,
hmm,
which became the forerunner of what's called lean manufacturing today, or the theory of constraints, or um, agile planning. Those are
Okay.
all subsets of what was done in the early 80s and even back to the 30s. This was W. Edwards Deming, had his 14 points and wrote about total quality control. And one of the
Okay.
things Deming said was, don't blame the person, blame the system.
yeah.
Got it. That's
People
really
want
good.
to do a good job. They just need to be systematized so they know what the definition of excellence is. And your customers want to have predictable service, and having systems allows them to have predictable service and products.
Absolutely.
Mm, that's
S-
good.
So where does this go? After you've systematized it, you've grown to be one of the best the companies there is in your industry. What happens next for you?
Well, and then I had to sell the business because the industry went away.
Okay.
And one of the things, I mean, I wasn't anxious to sell my vending company because I was, when you're in your mid 40s, it's really not a whole lot of fun to change careers 100%.
Right.
You're right.
Although I actually enjoyed it because I like to learn new things and I'm curious. So I got to learn a bunch of new stuff, like drinking from a fire hose for 3 years straight while working full time.
Yeah. That's difficult.
Um, but the industry, unfortunately, had gotten to the point where it was a zero growth industry. It was actually shrinking. It wasn't expanding.
Hmm.
And the reason very simply was if a plant had 1,000 people one year, 5 years later, they'd have 600 people. And 5 years after that, they'd have 300 people making the same amount of stuff they did with 1,000 people. And in
Uh,
the food service business, it was a headcount thing. If I went from 1,000 people to 300, well, my sales were going to drop by 65%.
right. So
And
you gotta
that
have
kept
those.
happening over and over. And people in the Northeast were closing down their factories and moving into the South or Mexico. And that was what was going on in the 80s. And the
Okay.
90s got really bad. So by 95, when I sold the business, I had people that wanted to buy it and I was ready to move on.
Okay.
And the business just wasn't functioning the way I wanted it to,
Got it.
from a
So
profitability point, not from a service point.
right. So right after you sold, what did you do immediately after that? I mean, did you take some time off? Did you?
Nope. I
No.
knew what I was going to do. And the day after I sold the business, I started work for Northwestern Mutual in the life insurance business and started learning that business.
Okay. And you mentioned that you didn't like being an employee and being
Well, they didn't like me having me as an employee either.
okay.
So it wasn't a
Yeah.
one-way street. It was
I
a
was gonna
Yeah.
two-way.
say,
It was a two-way street. They never
right. I
told me to
mean,
go away
going from
because I
running
actually
your own
produced a
business,
fair amount of business for them. But
right.
they weren't happy with the fact that I would. They used to teach you to say, "Well, just ask for 5 minutes with a business owner." And I said, "5 minutes? I can't say my name in 5 minutes." In fact, when I first met with business owners, I spent an hour and a half to 2 hours with them. And everyone said, "Well, how do you do that?" So I just asking questions. What do you mean? It's not all
Right.
that hard.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, that's
That,
so once they realized they didn't like you as a employee and you kind of realized that that wasn't a fit, how did you come up with the idea of what you're doing now?
No, it's like everything in the world. It's a metamorphosis. You do
Yeah.
one thing that leads to another, and leads to another, and leads to another. I went into the wealth management business. I opened up my own firm. We associated with a broker dealer, and I recruited 2 other people to join us. And we were basically doing wealth management. My specialty has been private business ever since I went into the consulting world. Some people asked me to consult, so I started putting together some consulting programs. And over the years, I basically have 2 businesses now. We have a consulting part of our organization and a wealth management part of the organization. And people can hire me one-on-one. We're putting together a one-to-many program right now, which is called Cracking the Cash Flow Code. But essentially is I like to take processes and name them,
Hmm.
because when I name it, it's easy for someone to understand that this is a discrete thing you do. Like we have a process called the stage 2 hiring process. We have the stage 2 um, um, the stage 2 values process, where we take people through a process where it'll help them figure out what their business needs to be about and what their core values are, and whether their core values are really core values or an aspirational value, which with a lot of business owners will say, this is a core value, but it's really not core. It's really aspirational, meaning it's something they would like to see happen, but hasn't happened yet. And understanding the difference between those two, how to put clarifying statements around it, and how to use values in running your business is what the whole stage 2 values clarification process is about.
And
So
then
I
this is
tend to
all,
name things. I just like to name stuff. It just makes it easier for people to understand what they're getting.
yeah, I think that very true. It's easier to understand, remember, and really connect to something when it's got a name. And that's why they say for like farm animals and stuff like that that you plan to eat. Don't name the pig because then you got an attachment to the pig or whatever it
Right.
may be. Um, so that's all part of the cash flow code.
That's not actually part of the cracking the cash flow code. Cracking the cash flow code is really about what do you need to do in your business to do
Hmm.
that. If you were to use our comprehensive planning process, then we get into the stage 2 values process.
Okay.
Um,
okay.
we have a program called the Objective Review, which includes cracking the cash flow code, the Financial Freedom Project, and the stage 2 values clarification project.
Very cool. So how did you find out that this is just something that you wanted to do? Did you ultimately just, like you said earlier, you just kind of stumbled into it, realized you were good at it because of how you had success at the company that you ended up selling, and then you just kind of ran with it and realized that you could add value to other business owners?
Yeah, I found what I could do is in usually around 10 minutes, get to the core issues that anybody is facing in their business and help them think about that a little bit differently. Um,
How do you do that?
well, I ask them a bunch of questions.
Okay.
It's essentially, what it comes down to is we have a thing before I'll work with somebody one-on-one. I want to make sure it's a good fit for them and a good fit for us.
Hmm.
So we have a thing we call the, I'm trying to think, this is really embarrassing. Um, it's called the alignment conversation. And essentially, the alignment conversation is, where are you now? Where would you like to be in the future? What's the difference between where you are today and where you want to be in the future? And if you could fill that gap, what would the value be of filling that gap? And by having that conversation, I'll pretty quickly be able to say, if you work on this, this, and this, you're going to get a huge result for relatively little effort.
That's awesome.
Okay. Yeah, that is cool.
So
That's
And,
really cool.
and it comes from the fact that there's literally nothing around a private business owner that I at least don't have speaking knowledge on, if not deep knowledge.
mhm.
Right. You're
And
somebody that has been in the trenches. You've done it all before them.
Well,
So
I've been in the trenches, but I've also read 2,000 books about business, attended
that too.
150 seminars around how to create a great business. So when it comes to something that I don't know about, I go out and learn about it. For
Right.
example, I had 3 clients who were talking to me at one time about lean manufacturing. And I really didn't know what lean manufacturing was, so I decided to go out and learn about it. And I found that lean manufacturing is actually the Toyota production system of what Toyota uses to build their cars, and that's just an outgrowth of Deming's 14 points, because Deming worked with Toyota, and it's a reason that Toyota blew the doors off American auto manufacturers in the 80s, was because they were using Deming's technology. And then from there, Toyota kept expanding and expanding and expanding, and that became lean manufacturing.
Okay.
So because I didn't know what it was, and then as I started reading books about lean, I said, oh, I know what this is.
Right.
I just didn't know what the name was that meant it.
So you already understood it in your head. You just didn't realize what they were calling it.
Right.
Got it.
So
That's great.
and that's a great answer. I mean, when you don't know something, go figure it out. And
Well,
that's
I mean,
huge.
what I used to do when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I was the chairperson for the National Vending Association's Education Committee.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I didn't know something, I would volunteer to teach it.
That's
Because
great.
that forces you to figure out how to.
If you are going to have to get up in front of a bunch of people and talk
Right.
about it as if you know it,
Right.
and you volunteer to teach it, you're going to have to learn it first.
Absolutely.
You are.
And
So I
if
did
you
that
if you
over
know
and
it
over
enough
and
to
over
teach
again.
it, then you're set. You know
Yeah.
a
By
fair
teaching
amount.
it, you learn it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some actionable steps, actionable items, speaking on this with whole getting educated and all of that? What are some actionable items that you would tell the person that's driving into work and doesn't like the job that they currently have and they want to do something entrepreneurial? What would you tell that person?
Well, 2 things. Find something that you think you can add value on, and it doesn't really matter where you can add value. Just figure out where you can add value, and then figure out if there's a business behind that. Meaning, can you charge enough to make a profit at it? And then you just start.
Love that.
And make sure you don't try to get to 99% correct before you start. There's a term in Silicon Valley called a minimally viable product. And you have to understand that a minimally viable product is the least product that you can bring out to market to see if other people think it has value. Because you think it has value doesn't mean your potential customers think it has value.
Right.
So you have to test the marketplace. I call it the 70% solution. I never want to launch anything that's been cooked at more than 70%.
Okay. Why is that?
Because it's just, I'm going to spend too much time in that last 30% to get it right before I start making changes anyhow.
Right.
I
And you don't even
promise
know
you
if it's going to be
when I
successful.
launch something, I'm going to do at least 3, 4, 5 pivots in it to make sure it's right before I finally say it's out in the world. And
Absolutely.
the only way for me to find that is to get into the marketplace.
That's right.
Very
To get
true.
people to kind of beta test it, if you will, and
Yeah, I mean, I'm
work the
doing
bugs
that
out.
right now. I'm putting together this one-to-many program, and I've got an email I'm working on right now saying, hey, I need your help. I want to put together a group of people to start thinking with me about what you need to learn if you're in a blue-collar business with 25 to 200 employees to make to create excess cash in your business. What
That's
is it
great.
you want to learn about it? I know what I think you need to know, but what I think you need to know is not going to get you into my program.
Okay. Interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. So Josh, where do you see yourself in the future? What's your plan for you?
Keep doing what I'm doing till I don't like it anymore.
Yeah. That's
And
true.
then just figure it out from there.
Find something
And
else to do.
I just turned 67 2 days ago. So it's not like, I've got, at 55, unfortunately, I came down with a really bad form of cancer. I was on the road to building a very large business. That all went to heck when I got cancer because I was done for about 4 or 5 years. I was trying to get through that. And afterwards, it was just, I'm too old to become the master of the universe. So I'm just going to do what I like doing and try to make a little bit of money at it.
Yeah, and now you can help create future masters of the universe.
If they have that interest, sure.
Yeah,
That's great.
that's
I love
awesome.
that.
So, Josh, we're going to switch it, transition into our Moments of Truth segment here. It's the same 7 questions that we ask all of our guests. And the first one is, who is your success role model?
My success role model? Oh boy, that's a good question. I've got a whole bunch of role models for me. I mean, and none of them you're going to know the name of.
That's all right.
So,
There could be multiple answers, and we don't have to
yeah,
know
I
the
mean,
name.
like
And if I
my
don't know the
success.
name, I'm going to look them up.
Yeah, well, Shields Harvey is my first mentor. He was certainly a role model. I think that um, I really like Steve Farber a lot, who is an author and a speaker. And, talks about using love in the context of business, which I think is a really good thing. Mike McColowitz is a good friend of mine. He's the guy who wrote the book Profit First. I think that he's a good role model. Michael Port's stuff, he wrote a book called Book Yourself Solid, which I think is the best marketing book I've ever read. He's a role model. Buckminster Fuller was a role model, even though I never met him. But he's been one of those role models who I think was one of the seminal thinkers of the 20th century. W. Edwards Deming is another role model, again, one of the seminal thinkers of the 20th century. So I have a whole bunch of role models to go along that. There's not one person who has said, this person formed me more than anybody else, except for my parents, obviously.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's great. What is your biggest success?
Doing interesting things with interesting people. Anytime I do that, it's a huge success for me.
And that just excites you and gets you
Yeah,
energized.
that's my personal mission statement, by the way.
Okay.
Do interesting things with interesting people. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that's what, it's a part of that. This doing this show, it drives me too, because every day I get to speak with interesting people and do interesting things, and that excites me too. So
yeah, it's just it's just a lot of fun to do. Life is better when you're with interesting people. In my opinion.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So, what does a typical day for you look like?
Depends on the day. They're all different. I don't have this morning routine thing.
No.
Yeah,
you're not a miracle morning guy.
No, I mean, if I actually sleep at night, I'll get up and work out in the morning, drink coffee with my wife, play with the dog a little while, then come into work. I journal probably five days a week. I never quite make it to 7. And my journal is based on reading a passage about the Stoics, and then writing what I think about that, and writing 5 things I'm grateful for. But I don't necessarily do that in the morning. I do stuff at all different times of the day, depending on what my fancy is. If I was a little bit more disciplined about this, I probably would be more effective at what I do, but I'm ADD in a big way. I actually think most private business owners are ADD.
I was just going to say that.
And anybody who's ADD who tells you they do a normal morning thing every time is just lying.
That's right. That's right. What is your favorite quote?
Wherever you are, there you are, which is from Buckaroo Banzai.
Okay. Can you explain?
Yeah. Wherever you are, be happy with wherever you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't wish you were someplace else. Stop thinking about the future or the past. Live in the present. I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle. And Eckhart Tolle basically talks about living in the present, because that's where life happens. It doesn't happen in the future or the past. The anticipation is nice. The past is okay for learning, but the present is for living.
That's really good.
Yeah, I like that perspective of it. That's a good interpretation of it.
Yeah.
So, what are some of your hobbies?
Well, I ski. I'm an avid skier. I'm an avid biker. I'm an avid improvisational music listener. I go to somewhere between 20 and 30 live music events a year.
Oh, wow.
I've seen the Grateful Dead play over 100 times, which if
cool.
you're talking to a real Deadhead, they'll say, well, that's just warming up.
Yeah.
I just saw Bill Walton speak a couple of weeks ago, and he's seen 1,400 Grateful Dead shows, which is approximately half of the shows the Grateful Dead ever played.
That's
That's
incredible.
insane.
Did you travel around with them?
I did when I was younger, and I still travel a bit. I mean, I live up in Burlington, Vermont, and I'll
Okay.
drive down to Boston to watch them play, or down to Albany, but I don't do what I used to do. I used to go on, 10, 12-hour drives to see them play, and go
Wow.
see. I remember 1973, I think I saw them play 10 or 12 times that year.
Wow.
Wow.
So
That's impressive. I don't even think I've attended. Oh, other than working at the concerts, I don't think I've ever attended more than 2,
I
3.
actually,
And
one of
paid for
my
them.
because I'm old, one of my claim to fame is I have seen every keyboard player for the Grateful Dead. And being a keyboard for the Grateful Dead is kind of like being a drummer for Spinal Tap. They're
That's
dying.
funny. There's just a ton of them.
Yeah.
That's funny. What is the best business book that you've read? I know it's a tough question because it sounds like you've read a ton.
The most important business book I've read, I think, for people who want to be successful private business owners is Traction by Gino Wickman.
Mm.
And I saw that he just released a new book today, which is dealing with the people you're talking to in this podcast, which are people who are starting brand new businesses.
What's that called? Do you know?
I don't remember the name of it, but if you just go Gino Wickman into Amazon, it'll pop right up at you.
Yeah. The Traction's awesome.
Traction's a great book. I mean, and I've actually read everything that he's written. But Traction, in my opinion, gives you a really good roadmap for how to run a business that's going to be sustainable, not just successful.
Yeah, that's right.
Give me 1 second here. I'm trying to look up the book so we can get the name.
Yeah.
Getting a little sidetracked.
That happens. See, you have a squirrel running across your screen.
Yeah.
So is it possibly It's the Manager? Maybe
I
not.
don't know.
No, it's completely different. How to Be a Great Boss? Maybe.
No.
Who knows? Someone else. If you figure it out, let us know.
Find it. His name, Gino Wickman, like you said. If they Google him or type him in on Amazon, they'll be able to find it.
So, and Josh, last question here: if there was one key piece of advice you could leave our listeners with about achieving success, what do you think it would be?
It would be don't run out of cash.
Yeah.
That's not advice. That's actually negative advice. And positive advice is learn how to delegate.
Okay.
If you don't learn how to delegate, you will never grow your business past 14 people.
I wouldn't even think you'd be able to get to 14 people.
Well, you can do 14 people because you have yourself and 13 helpers.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah,
most people don't really delegate. They just have a bunch of helpers in their business.
Yeah, that's right.
Very true.
Yeah, that's right. That's great.
So Josh, how can our listeners get in touch with you? And I know you mentioned to us prior to the show that you've got a book. How can they get your book? And
I do. I'll even show it to you.
See? Awesome.
Very
sustainable.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's called Sustainable?
Sustainable, a fable about creating a personally and economically sustainable business. It's a story. And you can get that at sustainablethebook.com if you buy it there. I also have a 37-page cheat sheet for how to implement all the stuff in Sustainable. Mm-hmm. And you get to have a 20-minute free coaching call with me.
Awesome.
You can also buy it at Amazon. It's in the Kindle version, and it's soft cover there. You can find me the easier thing to do is just go to Google and put Josh Patrick in. I own the first 4 or 5 pages.
Nice.
There you go. That's how you do it.
The other way you can find me is I have 2 websites. One is sustainablebusiness.com. Sorry, www.sustainablebusiness.co. And my other one is www.stage2planning.com with the number 2. In both places, there's contact me. If you want to email me, is jpatrick@stage2planning.com. And I'm easily found, and I actually answer my email.
Love that.
Oh, yeah, that's important. So, well, Josh, we appreciate you being on the show today. You provided a lot of value, to our listeners, and hopefully someone out there can resonate with, what you're talking about. And for our listeners, be sure to subscribe to the show so that you're not missing any of our daily episodes, and join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/wealth junkies. again, Josh, we appreciate you being on the show today.
Thanks so much for your time, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks. And we'll see
Yep.
everybody tomorrow.
Thank you, Josh.